Hi, my name's Steve Wigreiser, and welcome to another edition of The Leading Question. Today I'm here with Don Pak. Don Pak is an expert in the field of immigration law. He is a practicing immigration lawyer in the city of Philadelphia and in New Jersey and in the surrounding counties. And obviously, the topic of immigration is a hot button topic today. We hear about it every day on the news. And it's my pleasure to welcome you, Mr. Pak. How are you today?
Very good, thank you, Steve.
Terrific. So let's cover some of the basic concepts here. The basic concept of immigration, legal immigration, and illegal immigration. We hear about these topics in the news. What are we talking about?
Well, legal immigration is basically where you follow all of the steps, all the rules and procedures in immigration law. Which is interesting is that there are many ways that you can get yourself legalized, even though you may have falling out of status. And there were certain laws put into place with President Reagan, followed by President Bush and President Clinton. And it's just coming to terms of what it is that you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to obtain, your work permit or your permanent residency or even your citizenship, you just have to comply with the rules and the regulations that are set in place.
All right, let me go back even before that. So somebody from another country, it could be the Philippines, it could be Honduras, it could be Great Britain, wants to come to the United States to visit. Does every citizen of the world have the right to come to our shores and come and see the sights and beauty of our country?
Well, anyone that wants to visit the United States, they're entitled to file for their tourist visa. Now, whether they are ultimately approved for it or not is a different story. And generally, what they look for is whether or not you will perhaps overstay and not return back to your home country. And they determine that by looking at all of the factors. For instance, the age of the applicant, whether they're currently working, whether they have a high-level position, whether they own assets, and whether they've violated the immigration laws in the past.
I see. So not everybody can come even as a tourist and visit the United States.
That is true. If there's a potential that you would perhaps arrive in the United States and not return back to your home country, and they find some sort of, formula as to, figuring out whether or not you are likelihood to overstay, then they will deny your application.
All right, let's say you're a citizen of another country and you want to come to work in the United States. And I presume that this is something you deal with frequently in your practice. And I'll say for our viewers, Mr. Pak represents both individuals and corporations. And in fact, you represent some multinational corporations. So talk a little bit about whether individuals have the right to come to the United States and work, or whether companies have the right to bring people in to work here in the United States.
That's a very good question. Many companies, such as Google, Microsoft, any corporation out there that needs some of a specialty occupation, someone who's graduated from college or a master's degree, and is able to provide good services for that particular company, then the company would sponsor them for the relative position, which we call the job title and job duties. And if the applicant fits that particular job duty and title with their experience and their college degrees, they would be eligible to work if they get approved. And again, it's the approval process that's important. And then there are those who are of what we call outstanding achievers in sports and or science, and for instance, Nobel Prize winners and athletes like Sammy Sosa, the famous baseball player, or Pele, the famous soccer player. Those are gentlemen players or people who would be able to obtain their visas and permanent residencies based on their outstanding abilities.
Okay, now you've used the term visa, you've used the term permanent residence. I think we have to work the concept of a green card into all of this.
All of it is actually a visa, but it's more well known as what we call the green card. and that's the term green card is usually used for permanent residence. So in order to become a permanent resident, you have to have a sponsor. Usually it's a family member, an immediate family member. It wouldn't be your uncle, it'd be your U.S. citizen parents or siblings, or your spouse. And in some circumstances, it could be your permanent resident spouse or parents. And that would then lead to you being able to apply for adjustment of status, or what we call consular processing, where you're overseas and waiting for the process to be completed. And then you would obtain the green card, which is also better known as the permanent residence for the immigration practitioners.
Okay, so a green card means you're a permanent resident.
Correct.
Is that what you need to work, say, for 6 months or a year?
No, if you wanted to work for approximately, let's say, 6 months or so, there's other visas that would allow you to temporarily work, and we call that a non-immigrant intent. So in other words, an immigrant intent is the path to leading you to the permanent residence. A non-immigrant is for you just to work temporarily, whether it's 6 months or even 6 years, and then return back to your country.
And is the U.S. government more apt to grant that as opposed to permanent residency?
Actually, there really isn't a favoritism to either one. It's really about whether or not you fit the requirements, whether you have the eligibility to fit into one of those categories for the visas, whether it's an EB1, EB2, 3, 4, or 5, versus you becoming a green card through your parents or your spouse or your siblings.
Do you need to have an employer sponsor in order to get the appropriate visa to come to the United States?
In most instances, you would need a sponsor.
Now, is permanent residency something different than citizenship?
Yes, in order to become a citizen, the, uh, the requirement is that you have to have your permanent residence for at least 5 years. And with that, they then determine whether you have the requisite residency requirements. So you have to have been a permanent resident living permanently in the United States for at least half of the period of that 5 years. And until you reach that period of time, then you can apply for your citizenship.
I see. So let me just make sure that we have this pathway clear. Somebody is on the outside looking in and wants to ultimately become a United States citizen, or believes that he or she does. Um, in order to do it legally, and we'll talk about the alternative, what is the first step and what are the odds of success?
I think the first path we have to choose is whether we're going to apply through the employment path or through the immediate family path. So let's say that I'm sitting overseas in South Korea and my parents are U.S. citizens living in the United States. If I'm single and I'm over 21 years old, because that makes a huge difference, then it will probably take me a good couple of years before I'm eligible to get an interview. And then if I'm successful with my interview, then I would be approved for my permanent residence. And ultimately, I would arrive in the United States with that green card, as we call it.
I see. And would it be helpful to have a source of employment already in place, or doesn't it matter if you have family?
It actually does not matter. If you're going through the family immigration process, it doesn't matter if you have a job lined up or if you're going to remain unemployed. However, we would all want you to be employed. It's very helpful. And that actually raises another issue where currently the administration is putting out what they call a public charge inadmissibility. So in other words, if you were to arrive in the United States and you're eligible to become a green card, however, that you have perhaps used the government's finances to obtain welfare, food stamps, and whatnot, then the government is now looking to make you inadmissible. In other words, not allow you to get your green card.
Right now, do people in other countries, and again, I'm talking about people desiring to go through the established legal pathway, do they literally come to the gate and make the application, or is this something that is done from their home country?
It is usually done through what we call the USCIS portal, the website. You can either do it online or you can hire an agency or an attorney, and hopefully you would hire an attorney that's well qualified to file these applications.
Such as yourself.
Yes, I hope so. And once the application is ultimately approved, then you go through the different steps, such as going through the National Visa Center. There are fees that you have to pay with the National Visa Center, and then you would go through the State Department, where you file what we call the DS forms, the Department of State forms. And you will have your interview, and if everything goes well and the consular officer approves your case, then he'll stamp your passport, you'll get your visa that allows you to enter the United States.
Now, you've been doing this for some time. I'm going to guess at least 2 decades. And across several administrations, has there been a change in the relative difficulty of achieving a green card or permanent residency status during the course of your practice?
Absolutely, there have been some changes. I've been practicing immigration law for approximately 20 years and have seen several different administrations apply the immigration laws differently. Currently, it is getting harder. The requirements, I think, are a little bit more difficult to comply with. However, if you have all of the requirements necessary to become a permanent resident, then we can assist you with that process and get you ultimately approved.
Are there countries where individuals are more likely to gain entry and countries where they are more likely not to gain entry?
As you've probably seen with this current administration, a couple, I guess, even as last year, there's been some travel bans, and it's been harder for countries, primarily of Muslim-based religion, that it seems that it was a lot tougher for those folks living overseas in those countries to obtain their permanent residence, as well as even visiting the United States. But once you are able to get through the what we call the red tapes, and you have all of the requisite requirements, you should be allowed to enter the United States either as a tourist visa, or with a tourist visa as a tourist, or with a permanent residence.
Okay. Now, I'm not looking to get into the mechanics of illegal entry into the country. Obviously, we know that it occurs, it exists, and it's a fact of life. But once somebody is here, and let's use the example of somebody who legally came into this country, let's say as a tourist, and decides that they want to stay. They're here now, and they come to you. What options do they have?
The problem with that is once you are out of status, then it's really hard to get yourself back into status. One of the reasons is that there's a requirement that you maintain legal status throughout the whole entire process. One exception is being married to a U.S. citizen, and that process has never changed thus far. So if you enter the United States legally, which is the first threshold, then you happen to have met a wonderful spouse that you fall in love with and plan to live the rest of your life with that wonderful spouse, then he or she could sponsor you even though you've not maintained legal status or lawful status throughout the last couple of months or years. That can be overcome with your U.S. citizen spouse.
I see. Well, what if and I don't know how long a tourist visa would be.
Those tourist visas are good for up to 6 months with a one-time extension to up to 1 year.
So if somebody is here on a tourist visa and still in status, and they come to you, is there a way to begin the process to stay longer, let's say, to work here?
Right. So in that scenario, we have to be careful of what we call the immigrant intent, because when you apply for the tourist visa, you're basically saying that I don't want to go to the United States to do anything else but to travel, to tour the United States. But sometimes people's minds change. And when they enter the United States, they visit the beautiful country that we have and meet wonderful people all across the United States. And sometimes that happens to lead to marriage and lead someone to fall in love. And then they don't want to leave their loved ones anymore. And then they decide to get married. And with that kind of a situation, they are permitted to stay in the United States and to obtain their green card, and hopefully they will be approved by the USCIS officer.
I see. Well, let's say somebody is here and they are well beyond their tourist visa, or they came in illegally. Is there any pathway for somebody like that, short of marriage? And we can talk about marriage, but is there any pathway other than marriage for that individual to have the right to legally stay?
One of the problems that we have is what we call the 3-year and the 10-year bar. If you've been out of status and you have what we call the unlawful presence for more than 6 months but less than 365 days, in the event that you were to leave the United States, you could not return for 3 years. There's what we call the automatic 3-year bar. And if you've resided in the United States in unlawful status and left the United States and you've been here for more than 1 year, then there's that thing called the 10-year bar. So if you were to travel even for 1 day and try to re-enter the United States, you would be barred from entering or re-entering for 10 years. Now, are there exceptions? There are very few exceptions, and it would probably take a very long program for that. But just needless to say that if you had a U.S. citizen spouse, again, and or you had other immediate relatives, there are certain ways you could file what they call a waiver. That would still require you to leave the United States, but it would waive the 10-year bar or the 3-year bar that you have, and it will allow you to enter the United States without any particular years that you have to stay outside of the United States.
Right now, if we turn on the television on any given day, we're hearing stories about, quote, illegal immigrants being rounded up and I guess ultimately deported, although detained in the first instance. By and large, can you generalize about the status of those individuals? How did they come in, etc.?
Sure. Many of these individuals that you're hearing right now on the news happen to be people who are facing incredible scrutiny and persecution from their own government. And some of them are actually even being killed for various reasons, particularly for political opinions, where you're opposing the government, the regime. And for doing that, they want to teach you a lesson. And in some instances, there are countries that are trying to recruit members for their gangs. And if you don't comply or you don't oblige to become a member, then they will show you why it is important to become a member. And so often that leads to losing some, limbs or even being killed and tortured. So they run away from their country, which is really a shame because that's the country they love. They want to live there, but unfortunately, due to the circumstances of their own government, they cannot survive. So they leave their country and travel days and months to enter the United States, hoping and seeking what we call an asylum. So they're trying to plead to the U.S. government, saying that they have such a tremendous atrocity, and they need the United States humanitarian relief, basically, and is seeking some refuge to live in a place where they don't have to worry and look behind their backs every single day. And that process is called the asylum. And if you can prove to the United States government that you have been tortured or you will be tortured and been persecuted by your government, there's a good chance that you could be given the asylum approval.
Even today?
Even today, however, it has gotten tougher to obtain an asylum approval, and we fight this every day against the government. We try to put in our client's position in the best light possible and to explain to the prosecutors and to the judge that without their help, that if they were not provided the approval and access to the United States government to seek refuge, then they, in turn, if deported or removed from this country, that they will be killed or persecuted for the rest of their lives.
Right, but we have droves of individuals who are seeking asylum, and most notably on the news through the southern border. What chance do any of these people really have at being granted asylum?
Well, the chances is nothing in a percentage form. It's about the quality and the merits of the case itself. So if all of them have proven that they've been persecuted, their family, or they have a political opinion about it, or religion, or gender based, then they all can potentially, hypothetically, be approved for the asylum.
So it sounds to me like poverty, even extreme poverty, is not grounds for asylum.
That's absolutely true. Unfortunately, those that are seeking asylum based on poverty issues or a claim of being poor because of their country is not enough.
So despite what it says at Ellis Island, giving us, you're poor and wretched, etc., that doesn't really hold true.
It actually doesn't, not for asylum.
Okay. Is there another way for people to get in other than asylum?
Unfortunately, no. If it's not a family based or if it's not an employment based, where you have a business or corporation sponsoring you, as we talked earlier, and if it's not an asylum based, then there are very few options available for that person.
Briefly, because we're running low on time, let's talk a little bit about DACA. What does that mean, and where do we stand with that?
Well, DACA basically means it's a deferred action for the children. So those people who enter the United States at a certain period of time and they were under a certain age are provided temporary relief. In other words, you can go to school, you can even apply for a work permit, and if you fit the age requirements, that you can work. And at that point of time, if you ran into Immigration and Customs Enforcement, better known as ICE, that they would leave you alone. And that's been the way throughout the last administration. But the current administration, that doesn't seem to be the fact anymore. And it doesn't matter if you have DACA or not, because if the government, and particularly ICE, wants to remove you, they basically could. And it seems like they're enforcing that more often than not.
I see. If you are here illegally and you want to be able to drive, can you get a driver's license?
That's a very good question. And right now, there are currently about 14 states that provide either a driver's license or some form of driving, I guess, privilege card. And some of those states are California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, District of Columbia, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, Nevada, New Mexico, New York, Utah, Vermont, and Washington State. But otherwise, you could not obtain a driver's license. Now, I'm a proponent of giving everyone driver's license, regardless of your immigration status. And I am more about the economic value of that. There's an estimated somewhere between 10 and 20 million people who are out of status, or of what we call illegal or unlawful status. Now, if you think about it, to obtain a driver's permit or a license, it's about $35 per person. And if you multiply that by, let's say, 10 million people, you're bringing in a good amount of money. So $350 million a year. And you break that down into, let's say, 10 years, you're talking well over in the billions of dollars that are, being funded or funneled into the United States. Secondly, what happens is when you're providing a driver's license, you're getting the biometrics. You're getting their facial features. You're getting, their information. So what better way than to have border security and to have national security, but giving them the driver's license? It not only secures the borders better, because everyone here in the United States that have that driver's license. Secondly, you're bringing in this extra revenue into the United States. And thirdly, those who have driver's licenses ultimately get their auto insurance. Now, I think it's a great practice for everyone to have auto insurance. And unfortunately, those who don't have driver's licenses still tend to drive. And if they are driving without a driver's license, that also means they don't have auto insurance. And as you know, Steve, if someone gets in an accident and you don't have uninsured policy, and that person who hit you doesn't have auto insurance, then you're going to be suffering a lot financially yourself. So I think it's a win-win situation when you allow people to get their driver's license for national security reasons, for economic reasons, and this will also allow people to get more jobs, because you're going to need more people to work in these DMVs, the Department of Motor Vehicles, as well as the auto insurance agencies.
I see. With respect to work, if you're here illegally, if an employer requires that you have a social security number, can you get one?
The Social Security offices currently are not giving anyone who is in unlawful status Social Securities or Social Security numbers. In the past, they used to, and they used to also give what they call the employment numbers, ITIN. And so it's the individual tax identification numbers that they used to give, but it's getting harder to give those numbers or to obtain those numbers now.
If somebody is here illegally and needs medical care, can they go to a hospital and expect to receive care?
Well, that's really controlled more about the hospitals, and it's very, I guess, humanitarian wise that those who are seeking help and at the hospital, that the doctors, because they care about people, generally will take care of the patients that walk in at the ERs.
Just looking at where we are today and looking back over your 20 years, where do you see the field going?
Well, at this point, it's looking a little bit bleak, and we would love to see a big change in the administration or the future administration, which will allow those who are desiring to become a U.S. citizen, first, of course, a permanent resident, to give them an opportunity. Let them know how great this world that we have, and the United States, is a place that everybody wants to visit. It's the place that everyone loves and talks about in movies and so forth. And let us not forget that all of us are immigrants here, Steve. Unless you're a native Indian, back in even 1400s and so forth, there were no Americans here in the United States. So every single one of us, our parents and grandparents and great grandparents, somebody came here from another country so that we all could stay and live here in the United States free of harm and to live in peace.
And it sounds like your preference would be that everybody have that opportunity, the same opportunity that my ancestors had and your ancestors had.
I do. I am, again, all for border security and national security. We have to vet out those who want to come to the United States, make sure they're not terrorists, make sure they haven't committed some serious crimes. Absolutely. But besides that, if you are a person of good nature and you can contribute to the society, and we welcome that. We should welcome that. And an interesting fact is there are a lot of immigrants who came into the United States and offered so much for our country. We speak of people like Albert Einstein, who was born in Germany. And we are the former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's won multiple awards. Jerry Yang was born in Taiwan. He started Yahoo. And what about Elon Musk, who was born in South Africa? He founded Tesla, and so on and so on. I mean, it's just endless. Cary Grant, who do we have? Natalie Portman, who was born in Israel. She's famous for playing as the professional when she was 13, and of course in Star Wars she played in. And you have Alex Trebek, who was born in Canada, and he is best known for Jeopardy since 1984. And you have Bruce Willis. Whoever thought? I never knew this, but he was born in Germany. Bruce Willis. And you have Bob Marley. You have Sergey Brin, who was born in Russia. And what did he create? Google, of all things, right? And we all use Google. You have even William Penn, who was born in England. Penn, he created Pennsylvania. Andrew Carnegie, born in Scotland, business magnate and philanthropist. And so on and so on. There's so many great people who were immigrants, came to the United States and offered their life to us and gave us so much. And there are many more that can provide the same.
Well, I know there's more that you wish to say, but we're out of time. We'll certainly have you back. Something tells me that this topic is going to be in the news, at least through 2020. So we'll be sure to get you back on the show, and thank you for the information that you were able to share with us
today.
Thank you,
Steve. Glad to be here.
And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in on this edition of The Leading Question.